Hi guys, and welcome to a review video over Dragon Age: The Last Flight. Going back and looking over this book, I know I loved and enjoyed reading the story. It is a Dragon Age book, so going into it, my expectations were very, very, very high for the story. I was disappointed in some areas, and in others my expectations were exceeded. The story was a fantastic read and answered many questions about the Fourth Blight and especially about griffins, which was the entire point of this novel. It was mainly over griffins and what became of them, what happened, how they became extinct, and all of that fun stuff. When I was reading this, I had a drawback to one of my favorite series by Anne McCaffrey, and that was her Dragon Riders of Pern. The relationship between Aecia and her Griffin Revis reminded me very strongly of the relationship the dragons and riders had in those books, and I enjoyed seeing that. Even if it wasn't intentional, it was just fantastic to see, and it reminded me so much of that it was just so very nice. That is why I recommend the book for anyone who enjoys fantasy. It's just a great fantasy read. You don't need to know anything about Dragon Age to sit down and read this book. That being said, the first part of this review is going to be over my negatives over the story. I loved the book. It is highly recommended. This is just my one pet peeve that I had while reading it, and that was the fact that Valia and her point of view always seemed to get glossed over, to the point where at the end where one of her friends dies, I didn't care. I ended up actually having to reread that part several times because I was so shocked that I didn't care. It was something in a Dragon Age book I didn't expect to see, because in every book prior to this, Asunder, Masked Empire, The Calling, and The Stolen Throne, I have cared when characters died, to the point where at the end of The Masked Empire I was in tears because of a death, and it just was so shocking to see that I didn't care, because it wasn't the point of the story, I think, to care very strongly about those characters and their plights. We did get some of their back history. It was glossed over very quickly by them just telling Valia what their back history was. And I do wish that we had had a bit more conversations between them, actually seen the development of the relationships between Valia and her companions a little bit more. There were 80 pages less in this novel than others, and maybe those 80 pages could have been placed with Valia, but it does take away from what the novel really is about, and that is the Fourth Blight and what happened to the Griffins. That being said, the parts of the book that I really enjoyed were the ones told by Aecia and her Griffin, with her Griffin Revis, and it was wonderful to see. I felt very attached to this character and her Griffin. I felt what she was feeling whenever she had to do something to the Griffins, and it was very emotional during those scenes. When she was crying, I felt like I was crying, and it was just wonderful to read those parts. And her story is what makes this book worthwhile. While Valia is the character who you are kind of following in some senses, because she's the one who finds Aecia's journal and is reading it, but she finishes the journal less than halfway through the book, and you're still reading the journal, so I guess maybe if I'd seen some of Valia's reactions instead of it being hinted at what was happening, I might have felt something a little bit more. Anyway, as I said, Aecia was a great character. I really enjoyed her and her Griffin and the relationship shown there, as well as everything else, and I felt very sorry for Aecia near the end, especially given what happens with her and her brother and how she becomes kind of the one no one wants to talk to. It was very depressing, very sad, and I hated seeing what became of the Griffins because of something that she did, and she hated seeing it. And it was very emotional for her and for me to read that, because I knew that she loved the Griffins very dearly. They were her life. It was what she basically lived for within the Grey Wardens. and it was just depressing to see. The story, like I've said several times, did a marvelous job with her, and I give 2 thumbs up for that part of the story. The ending of the book, I had guessed very quickly with it, being the second I saw that the chapters went back in time to the Exalted Age from the Dragon Age, a red flag went up and said, oh, this is how this book is going to be told, and I guessed the ending. Was I shocked at the end of the book with what happened, or did it ruin my experience? Not really. Even though I had guessed it, it was still very emotional to see what had happened, and I wouldn't take that back for anything. I loved the ending, I loved feeling the joy of seeing it, and the joy of knowing that I had been right was great to also see. The way the ending was told was such that it leaves you hanging and wanting for a little bit more, which I was kind of sad about, because most Dragon Age books also have an epilogue. The Master Empire actually had its going down portion in the epilogue, where you had to read the epilogue no matter what, because it felt like the last chapter, not an actual epilogue. With The Last Flight, there was no epilogue, there was just that ending. It was a great ending, beautiful, very beautiful. But I did want more, and I really want to see what happens with Valia, and especially with what she finds at the end of the novel. I am not going to give it away, because I do think that part is the most valuable part of the entire series. Not series, entire book, and it's worthwhile to not have it wrecked, even though I have wrecked parts of the story. It's just, you need to read that part to understand where I'm coming from, and why I still give this book high marks, despite my initial dislike of Valia's point of view. This book, compared to the other Dragon Age books, is pretty much tied with quite a few of them. If I had to rank it, I would say it's probably right next to The Calling, which is near the bottom of the list, sadly. My favorite book would have to be The Stolen Throne. But this book is still one of my favorite books, and I do recommend it to anyone who loves fantasy novels. The story in and of itself, as I've said, is fantastic, and it is just beautifully written, especially Ayesia's point of view. I loved it, and as I said, my only critique was really the one part about Valia's companions, how we knew next to nothing about them, and what we did know came from quick, short summaries and kind of sometimes forced conversations between Valia and her companions. That being said, I loved the book, it gets high ratings. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please leave a comment below and thumb up the video.